Welcome back, everybody, to a special roundtable with Michigan head coach Erik Bakich and ECU head coach and our favorite to our shows that we do here, Mr. Cliff Godwin. Coach Godwin, how are you today, man?
I'm doing great, Josh. Thanks for having me. And not just the head coach for Michigan, but one of my best friends and former teammate at East Carolina.
Well, why is he such a big deal right now?
Why is he such a big deal? Well, he's very successful. Hey, he's very successful in what he does. And, you know, the thing that's really cool about our relationship, Josh, and I know this is not what the story is about, but you're talking about myself, who grew up in Eastern North Carolina, small town, and Erik Bakich grew up in Northern California. He comes to school at East Carolina after junior college, and him and Nick Schnabel are two of my best friends, and just how great of a job Coach LeClaire did molding everybody's different backgrounds. And, you know, it's just an awesome relationship, and he's a great guy. And I know we're going to talk about the new baseball model, but he's a better person than he is a coach.
Coach Bakich, you are obviously, Michigan had a great year the last time we played a full season. You won National Coach of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, that year. And right now, you are in the headlines for drawing up the new baseball model. So my first question is, this thing is very creative. It's very colorful. It's very well planned out. My only maybe concern is the name. The name is very generic after all of that creativity, the new baseball model. How'd you come up with that name?
I have no idea, Josh, but thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on the show. Great to be here with one of my best friends, Cliff Godwin. You know, our relationship and friendship goes back almost 25 years. So there's not a day that goes by that we don't you know, shoot each other a message on our group chat. And so just, you know, it's awesome to be able to do this. To work a profession where you're working with your closest and best friends and doesn't even feel like a job. It's just a lifestyle. And that's really what was poured into this new model, was just the passion for college baseball and the friendships and the relationships and everything that we've been a part of as coaches, and wanting it better for the future college baseball players that come. And this model creates that. And not a better time to do something like this than the post-COVID era, where, you know, we are faced with some very tough circumstances financially for all of higher education, dealing with enrollment in college football, but especially our sport, which operates at such a significant financial net loss among almost all teams.
So let's go ahead and start here. Before we dig into what does this new baseball model say, the first question is going to be why, and I know you just kind of tapped into that a little bit at the end of that last answer. Why do we need a new baseball model?
Well, if you're asking me, it's because we need to do something to be proactive for the post-COVID world. You know, the college athletics landscape is changing, whether it's, you know, post-COVID, whether it's name, image, and likeness, whatever it may be. And, you know, our sport, to be candid and frank, is a financial drain on our athletic departments. And our athletic departments and our institutions are now in a financial struggle and looking for ways to be more efficient with their bottom lines and be more fiscally responsible. And we have to do the same thing. I think everybody in the country right now is doing this kind of self-audit, whether you're an athletics team or a business or corporation. Everybody's looking for ways to be more financially sustainable. And college baseball needs this. You know, we don't get anything passed that we try to do to grow the game, whether it be adding a third assistant coach or adding more scholarships. And if you're an athletic director, there's no way you're going to continue to spend money on a sport that loses so much money. And now you get to this where circumstances in the world has changed, and, you know, we felt like we needed to be proactive, or we may not like the results that will be handed down to us. And we've seen that in the last couple of weeks with programs being dropped. And so this is just a way to be proactive. It's a way to lead and get out front. And maybe most importantly, what kind of gets swept aside a little bit or cast aside, but it's not. It's two of the main three prongs of this rationale is the benefits to the student athletes academically and for their own health and welfare. But the money portion, the finances portion, that's something that just needs to be at the forefront just because of where we are in the world right now in the post-COVID era.
Which one of these is the driving force, right? Isn't money the driving force behind everything in society these days?
Well, the welfare and the academic piece should be enough to stand alone and move this forward. But where we are in current times, the finances just is what is talked about the most, because that's what's in everybody's, mental proximity right now, is figuring out how are we going to adjust when enrollment's down, when college football ticket sales are down? Are we playing college football? How are all these athletic departments going to decrease expenses and be more financially efficient and sustainable? And so for us, if we ever want to get financially sustainable ourselves or have growth, we have to make adjustments first. And this is a great way financially to make some adjustments, whether you're a northern team saving money or a cold weather team saving money from travel, or a warm weather team saving money from large financial guarantees and making money with increased attendance revenue. This model just makes sense. What doesn't make sense financially is playing baseball on Valentine's Day.
Coach Godwin, you have one of the largest fan bases in college baseball. You guys are packed every night. There's fans in the outfield drinking and having a good time. They're yelling at the opposing team with these huge megaphones. It's wild there. It's crazy there. You're very fortunate to have that, but that is not the case around the country, huh? So what does the college baseball scene look like on a March 15th Wednesday game? If you're on the road, what does it typically look like in places around the country?
Well, you're saying March 15th. I mean, you go back to February 15th, and in the weather in North Carolina, it can maybe be 70 or it might be 32. So you don't know. But I go back to this year, the Keith LeClaire Classic, third week of the season, game 2, we're playing Ole Miss. I mean, 2 ranked opponents, and we had a big crowd because it was 2 ranked opponents, but it would have been bigger if it had been later and the weather had been better. So, for a place like us, it's a no-brainer. And as Erik has stated several times, it's not about Michigan. It's not about East Carolina. I'm just showing you data from attendance figures across the country and how financially it's going to benefit institutions. And it might not benefit every institution, but with the data Erik has gathered, we feel like it will benefit most institutions. The other piece that I think, and Erik mentioned this about the student athlete welfare, Josh, is, we had this happen to us this year where we started school a week later. So we started school, I think January the 11th or 13th, can't remember. I think it's 13th. First day of official team practice is the 24th, where you're scrimmaging on the 24th. So we've only had our guys on campus for 11 days. And you're asking a guy to go out there and throw 1 to 2 innings. Well, one of our best pitchers, Jake Kuchmaner, who is as responsible, hardworking, comes up with arm soreness. Well, is it because he wasn't on campus? Is it because of the temperature? All those things, go into it. And Erik has data from Dr. James Andrews that show you that the spike in injuries happened earlier in the calendar year than later. Well, why is that? Is it weather? Is it increased or decreased ramp up time as far as the number of days that you have to get kids ready? Name a sport that you send them home for 4 or 5 weeks on their own, and then you're asking them to be ready to compete against themselves in 11 days and then another opponent in a month. I mean, that's a lot of strain on 18 to 22-year-old's body.
So let's go ahead and first off, I guess I should go back for 1 second, and then I'm really going to go through these and have you guys, the finances part, the academics, the welfare, and we'll break those down one by one so we don't confuse any listeners, and I'll try my best to set you up that way. But what does it look like, Coach Bakich? What is essentially what is the plan? Not the why to it, but I see the count. Is it simply let's move the season back?
Yeah, that's what it is. It simply states that in order to decrease expenses, increase revenues, improve academic success and student athlete welfare, the best way to do that is to shift the season back to the third Friday in March. And in doing so, you improve all of those components right there. So it's very simply a season shift of about a month. Now that's nothing new. That proposal has been recycled over and over again for 4 decades. And there's been some guys who've put in tremendous amount of work highlighting the disadvantages of cold weather teams for weather and competitive equity. Unfortunately, like guys like John Anderson and Randy Mazey, unfortunately, that's just a non-starter, has been a non-starter, will always be a non-starter because frankly, nobody cares, right? The warm weather teams don't want to hear about the disadvantages, perceived disadvantages of cold weather teams. And I can tell you as a cold weather coach, not going to stop us, not going to hurt our, so what? The weather's the weather. So nobody wants to hear it. Once you change the narrative and shift the point of view from northern teams and cold weather teams to, okay, what's the point of view of the warm weather teams and how does this financially impact all of college baseball? Now you've got people's ear and their attention, especially when we're not giving our opinions. This is not based on what Erik and Cliff think. This is based on the data. And what does the data say? And what do the medical experts say? And then just here's the information. If you want to form your own opinion off the information, go ahead. But this is what the information says.
Okay, so Coach EB, where does revenue come from in college baseball? Is it just ticket sales and how much popcorn you can sell that night? In football, obviously, there's a lot of branding and marketing that goes on and TV deals and things like that. Where can you make money as a college baseball program?
Currently, our revenue streams are ticket sales and whatever you sell in concessions and merchandise. Now, ticket sales, you have, so those two go hand in hand. Because as Cliff mentioned, actual attendance is different than paid attendance. When you look at attendance in February and early March, you may have the credit of what the season ticket holders who've purchased tickets. It may say 3,000, but we use our eyeballs and we see there's barely 1,000 people in the stands. Well, that has revenue implications because those people they're not buying concessions and food and drinks and alcohol if you sell it. So there's some revenue opportunity lost there. The bigger component is just the data says that college baseball fans show up more in April and May than they do in February and March. And then you start to look at why that is. And why that is because, like Cliff said, could be 32 in Greenville in February. It could be 60 or 70. It's a crapshoot. All the fringe weather schools, everywhere that's supposed warm weather has colder weather in February and March than they do in April and May. That's a reason. It's not the only reason. One of the biggest reasons is it's basketball season. And the collegiate fan can only spread their energy so many places. So as they should be, they're focused on conference tournaments heating up, March Madness heating up. And then you have these athletic departments with one marketing department in their athletic department. And they can only spread their energy so many ways. And they're focused, as they should be, on the same thing. Conference tournament, March Madness. And the general fan, by the time they even turn their attention to baseball, it's baseball season, which is major league season, which is April. So if we can start our season as close to that as possible, that's a huge advantage. You mentioned TV. That's not anything that's calculated as a revenue stream, but in terms of exposure and opportunity, you've got the majority of TV networks focused on basketball season, conference tournaments and March Madness, but now you would have additional exposure for some of these great early season matchups in college baseball because it's baseball season. So not only are more fans showing up in April and May, and we'll have higher gates and higher concessions and higher revenues from those concession streams and ticket revenue streams, but you open the door for TV, you open the door for just the growth and exposure of college baseball just by playing a little bit later.
Okay, so that's a new thing for me. So even college football teams, there is no TV deals that would count towards revenue stream. Is that what you said, just to clarify?
Well, the TV deals, there's distribution payouts to conferences. It's not like Cliff and East Carolina are going to get a check because their game was on ESPN3. It's more the exposure and the growth of the sport, more chances for games to be televised when you're not directly conflicting with basketball.
Gotcha. Cliff, as I said before, you guys have one of the biggest fan bases, the #1 fan base, I believe. I'm sure you'll make sure I'm right here, in North Carolina, the biggest attendance of any school in North Carolina. Even your school, and if you can't answer this, tell me, but I mean, even your school, are you guys self-sustainable as a baseball program? I mean, can you turn a profit and run the program the way you want to run it, even with a huge fan base?
Number one, Josh, the data says, as we've been saying, that East Carolina has the best fan base in the state of North Carolina for the past 19 years, 20 years if you count this year. So that's just the data. That's not an opinion. That's the data. So we're just speaking in facts here.
That's the data, just to clarify.
That's the data.
Yes, CG, go Pirate.
The second part to your question of can we be self-sustainable? No. I mean, I was actually talking to our CFO because there was an article put out, and the article said that ECU baseball operates at close to $1 million deficit each year. Now that sounds like glaring. That's with coaches' salaries. That's with the scholarships that the university pays out for a player. So that's everything incorporated on an expense line. So the real answer to your question is no. But we're also bringing in some revenue, which we almost bring in as much revenue as our basketball program does here, which is pretty abnormal across college athletics. So we do a good job because of our fan base. This year was going to be also the first time, and it did happen for the number of home games we had, that we could actually sell alcohol or adult beverages within the stadium. Up until this year, there was a state law in North Carolina where if you were a state university, it had to be in a enclosed area or a select area, so a suite area. But this year, it was opened up for anybody that bought admission to the ticket or to the game that was 21 could purchase an adult beverage, which would have driven the revenue up some, especially when the weather is conducive for people to come. I think that allowing people to have an adult beverage in Clark LeClaire Stadium, just with the jungle atmosphere, maybe if you're not even a big-time baseball fan, you're just coming out there to socialize and have an adult beverage, I think that would have had more people in Clark LeClaire later when the weather was warmer.
Having seen some of the videos, I think the folks in left field have found ways to get alcoholic beverages into those games, but it would be better if it was contributing to the team's stream for sure. Okay, Coach Bakich, there's not just this increased revenue stream, there's also decreased expenses. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, you're just talking about improving the bottom lines. Whether you're decreasing expenses or increasing revenues, you're improving your bottom line. So for cold weather teams that may not have large attendance like East Carolina or a lot of the big schools in the Southeast, it's a huge opportunity for those cold weather schools to not have to get on an airplane and travel the first 4 weeks, because that is cause for an enormously inflated travel budget. I can just speak from our expenses at Michigan, and this permeates throughout the Big Ten and competitive northern teams. Our travel expenses are north of $200,000 for the first 4 weekends. That's on average for the last 5 years. We're averaging 4 flights for the first 4 weeks of the season. And when you're talking about, because like Cliff alluded to, with decreased ramp time, there's very short window to prepare our players for the opening day, we have to take all 35 guys on these trips, and that's expensive. We have to. We can't overthrow a pitcher early in the season because we're only taking 27 guys. And that's our justification to our administration of why we need to spend this extra money to bring these large travel parties early in the year. So they go hand in hand. but not everybody's taking 4 flights. And the coaches that are listening to this that are from cold weather or fringe weather regions of the country that do travel early in the year, they just need to run their numbers. What do your numbers say? What do you spend on airplanes? What do you spend on buses? What do you spend on hotels? What do you spend to feed your guys? And can you take that savings to offset what it's going to cost to keep your players on campus for the final 4 weeks of the season after the academic year? And for a lot of these teams, it's anywhere from at worst net neutral to at best pretty significant net positive savings there. So you're improving the bottom lines. And even if you're not, even those numbers are pretty similar. Whatever you spend to travel early is about what you spend to keep them later. Well, you're still playing in a better time of the year to play baseball during baseball season. So it just financially makes sense for cold weather teams. But for warm weather teams, that's been the thing that we've highlighted is why would warm weather teams want to be on board with this? And that's where going to the attendance data and going through every box score of every team that's hosted a regional for the last 5 years and calculating and inputting them in, and then you can find the trends by month. And then you can see, wow, the majority of these teams average more fans in April and May than they do in February and March. And you look at just what the data says, and that tells you that the revenue that you can generate as a warm weather team, especially for schools like East Carolina or anyone that has somewhat of a decent fan following, you don't have to be Arkansas or LSU, but if you can have if you got decent fan support, that attendance shows it's going to increase, and the revenue that you generate from those increased ticket sales, concessions, et cetera, can offset your costs for keeping the kids on campus after the season, after the academic year ends.
Josh, on our side of it, we're paying out $40,000 to $50,000 in guarantees for teams to come play us that want to get out of the cold weather. And then on the flip side, in 2018, and we're going to do it again in 2022, we played North Carolina a 3-game series. 1 game in Clark LeClaire, 1 game in the AAA Park in Durham, 1 game in Chapel Hill. Well, we sold out on Friday night, which it was early in the year, but the weather just happened to be one of those crazy second week of February. It was great weather. Sold out in Greenville. We made, I think, $27,000. East Carolina, also Carolina made 27, and also the Durham Bulls made 27,000 because we split it 3 ways. And then we played at Carolina on Sunday. So if you're playing matchups like that, I know everybody's not going to be able to have a weekend like that, but if you're playing more regionally, then you're not paying out the $40,000 to $50,000 in guarantees to get northern teams to come down because you're starting a little bit later. You're playing more regionally, and I know I'm speaking for East Carolina, but for everybody, you would at least save guarantee money by not having to pay northern schools to come down and play.
Obviously, we all want to, create a revenue stream that turns a profit. But is that the most important thing for this plan in terms of the financial part of it, or is what you're really trying to accomplish is to help these teams not operate at a loss?
Well, that's what you just said is 100% accurate. This is not a magic pill to make college baseball all of a sudden a revenue sport. Now, some schools may have that opportunity because there's only a handful right now that truly operate in the black. Most teams, like Cliff mentioned, operate at a significant financial net loss, upwards of over 7 figures, right? Over 7 figures. So if you can decrease those expenses and improve those bottom lines, so if you're not such a financial drain to your university. I would say this proposal, it's like the rising tide that raises all ships, right? The elite programs are still going to be the elite programs. They're going to, in fact, have a chance to have better attendance than they've ever had. But it also raises the floor. So you're not only raising the ceiling of college baseball, you're raising the floor. Some of these teams that are such a financial drain on their institutions that are truly in jeopardy of being cut, this may save them because now they're not so bad. They don't contribute such a financial net loss to their institutions. So no, not a magic pill of all of a sudden college baseball is, minor league baseball where 122 out of 160 teams draw 2,000 or more fans a game. but the data says this is going to significantly improve the bottom lines of the majority of college baseball. It is not a one size fits all. It is a one size fits most.
So Coach Godwin, even though you have maybe a competitive advantage being a Southern team, you're still in favor of this because you're in favor of improving the game, and this overall improves the game. But can you explain why Southern teams have that competitive advantage?
Josh, Erik and I have talked about this a lot because that's something. When you talk about a competitive advantage, it makes coaches, it makes players, it makes people nervous. Look, I think the best coaches, the best programs, as Erik would agree with me on this, are going to stay that way. I don't care if you drop Erik Bakich off in Canada or Michigan or Florida, he's still going to be a great baseball coach. He's going to have a great baseball program. Tim Corbett, same thing. And there's a lot of other ones. I say those two guys because I worked for Corbs at Vandy with Erik, and Erik's one of my best friends. But the great organizations are going to be great no matter what geographical location they are located in. That's my opinion. I think Erik would agree with me on that.
Yeah.
So
the people, Josh, the people running them are what make them great. So, yeah, I mean, when you start talking about competitive advantages, now you're starting to get into people's opinions. So really it's better to just focus on here's what the data says. And, 36 out of the 40 teams that have hosted in the postseason for the last 5 years have been in warm weather states. There's a clear advantage there, but this isn't about any competitive advantage between North and South, cold and warm. The only disadvantage that in highlighting the weather in this proposal is financially the reasons why those cold weather teams have to spend money early in the year. That's the disadvantage. They have to spend more money, and the warm weather teams have to pay guarantee money to get those teams down there. And that financially doesn't make any sense.
Well, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but just looking at the proposal, it wouldn't look good if you as a Northern state coach brought up competitive advantage, because then it just looks like you're trying to even the playing field for yourself. But it is true. Like, in parity in the game is a good thing. I mean, so I don't see why competitive advantage shouldn't be part of this. I mean, is there a reason you kind of left it off the main points here?
Yes, because nobody cares and nobody wants to hear it. And 40 years competitive equity has been a topic for moving the season back. And for 40 years, it's a non-starter, it gets shut down. So if the real goal here is to save some teams or to make college baseball more financially sustainable, or eventually to grow college baseball to where we are getting that third paid assistant coach, where we are getting more scholarships, and most importantly, we're improving the situation for the student athletes, improving their situation academically, improving them for student welfare standpoint, health and safety standpoint. Who cares about competitive equity and things that are very debatable and based on opinion? Let's just stick with this is what the data says. Data says we're making a huge financial mistake by playing on Valentine's Day, and the attendance shows that.
Okay, so perfect. That answers two big parts of this for us. Now let's go to the academic side of things. Coach Godwin, I know you're big on this with your players. I know all coaches are big on this, and you guys have been recognized for Team GPA. How does this help the academics, for the players? How are they going to be better in school?
Well, number one, right off the bat, is they will miss less class time. And Erik travels more early than we do, but you would miss less class time. And Erik would have to give you his specific numbers, but I would say even for us, it would allow us to miss 4 or 5 days less than what we do now, which normally we kind of miss between 10 and 12 days over the course of an entire spring semester. So it would help us by 4 or 5 days, I think.
Okay, and so what does, Erik, what does the data say on this academics part of the proposal?
The data says that of the teams that have hosted regionals in the last 5 years, they have played over half their games in the months of February and March. So number one, they're playing over half their home games when less people are going. But number two, they're jamming and stuffing a lot of games into the heart of the academic calendar. And by moving the season back, by shifting it back, you don't have to play double midweeks all the time. You can spread those midweeks out. The student athletes have spoken out about that, and they feel like they are at a disadvantage academically with all the academic conflicts that are presented to them in a spring season. And by playing 4 weeks after the academic year, with the exception of the quarter schools, and there's only 17 of them, so it's 282 schools operate on the semester. So we're talking about the critical mass here. Those teams will be able to offer more games that aren't in direct conflict with the academic calendar, which is better for the student athlete, regardless of geography. Now, looking at geography, those cold weather teams that are getting on airplanes, they're missing 1 to 2 days of school every time they do that because you're leaving on a Thursday for a Friday game. When you're talking about your conference segment, whether you play 24 or 30 conference games, that's what the majority of college baseball is in conference. Now you're talking about half your games are on the road, half your games are at home. Most of them are during the academic year because most people get out in early May. So now you're looking at everybody's missing, again, 1 to 2 days of school for conference games because they're leaving on a Thursday to play a Friday through Sunday series.
Does this affect the off season, the fall as well, Coach EB?
Well, absolutely it does, because you're asking for 4 additional weeks of the player's time. And time management and time demands is a very hot topic among administrators, faculty, athletic reps, university presidents, their time in college. And so we're giving that time back to them in the fall. This has huge academic benefits as well. As Coach Godwin and all coaches know, we are always in a rush to put everything into the fall segment. We have this long fall segment, but we have to get everything in because we have this very short segment in January leading up to the season starting in February. So all of our bunties, all our first and thirds, all our scrimmages, all our exhibition games, all our inter-squad, everything has to be in. So you're trying to do strength and conditioning, you're trying to do player evaluation, you're trying to get your pitchers innings, your players at bats. And academically, the players aren't able to kind of ease into the semester in either semester. They're thrust right into athletic activity. So this new model, not only in the spring, allows them to ease into more of the academic year, but in the fall, now we are giving 4 weeks back to the players in the form of discretionary weeks, which is what football has, which is off time. You can still have volunteer activity, but it's off from a countable athletic related activity perspective. And it allows the players to be a little bit more like college students in the fall. It shifts our model, instead of being so lasered in on player evaluation, to more player development. Now you can really focus on strength and conditioning. And now you still have a baseball window, a 28-day window where you have 14 official team practices. But as coaches, we know how we can use all 28 of those days, almost like an instructional league where we can still put in a lot of our foundations. So we still get a baseball segment. The new kids coming in, you can still scrimmage and see those guys throw, but you just allow a better player development model with this new model as opposed to the current one we have now.
For example, if we were starting collegiate baseball new, college baseball hasn't been played yet, or baseball hasn't been played at the collegiate level, and we were looking at what's the best model to implement it, what we would not do is say, let's have this really long segment of practice in the fall, a really short segment prior to opening day, and let's make opening day Valentine's Day. People would not think that was a great idea, but that's our current model. Also, if you were to do the inverse of this, and our current model of opening day was the third Friday in March, and somebody said, hey, I got a new idea for a proposal. Let's move the season up. Let's make opening day on Valentine's Day. How's that sound? People would laugh it off, but that's what we're currently doing. And so that's where looking at this from a financial lens, an academic lens, and a student athlete welfare lens, it just makes so much sense
to shift this back 4 weeks because of the significant positive impact on those 3 criteria.
Let me go ahead and push back on this because there's so much data here and everything's fact. I see in one of the parts here, it says, while important from a player development perspective, the fall term is less essential for player evaluation. Isn't that an opinion or subjective?
Well, sure it is. It is an opinion, but it also supports the student welfare of a medical expert's opinion that says we should not be allowing only 5 weeks of ramp time prior to opening day. But yet that's all we have. And it's less than professional baseball. Our professional counterparts get 6 to 7 weeks in spring training. So it's stated, maybe it's construed as my opinion, but that's discussing with Dr. James Andrews, who's the medical expert, who says a 9-week ramp time, which is what the new model gives us, is a no-brainer. And he can't see why anyone would argue against that. And the data that we have for when injuries spike at the major league level, looking at a 17-year study and seeing how the elbow, the shoulder, obliques, hamstrings, everything have these spikes in spring training and right after the season starts. And CG and myself and all college baseball coaches know we deal with the same things. We just can't disclose that because of privacy of the amateurism of the player. But looking at those two, nobody's saying the fall is not important from a baseball standpoint. But what doesn't make sense is why would we have a really long segment in the fall and a really short segment before opening day? That's where the medical experts are saying that's counterintuitive. In fact, that's not counter, that's just flat dumb.
Right. So the idea behind that part of it is not necessarily to say that this is factual, that this is what teams are doing. It's what medical professionals are saying you absolutely should be doing. You should be developing during that time, not necessarily evaluating. Is that correct, what I just said?
Well, if coaches want to evaluate in the fall, they certainly can. They can do whatever they want in their 28-day window. If they want to have scrimmages, they can. But look at what we're allowed to do. We're allowed to play an exhibition game, 2 games against an outside competition in the fall, but not in the preseason before opening day. Yet you look at what do other sports do? They don't play their exhibition games in the off season. They play their exhibition games prior to opening day, from professional sports to collegiate sports. So our model, just trying to be stuffed into the 2 semesters of an academic calendar, just doesn't make sense. And where we are in the world in the post-COVID era, now is the time to make these adjustments for college baseball to be financially sustainable, but also to make the adjustments for the benefit of the student athletes. They've been the ones that have been the unfortunate receivers of some of these tough calendar models on their academics and on their health.
So Coach Godwin, as we talked about on the college tour, that was when I first started to try to dig in and learn a little bit about you and where you have been. And I was blown away. I had no idea until then of your resume and the places you have been. It's incredible. It's awesome, the programs you've been to. And thinking of that experience on the whole, can you give us, an idea? How often do you see players in your career that cannot graduate in 4 years because the schedule is just too crazy for them, so they have to take that extra year?
I would say a few guys in every program, no matter what the academic institution's workload is academically. I would say, I'm throwing an average out, but I would say 3 or 4, and it might be more in some programs, might be less in others. But as Erik says, we're cramming a lot into a small window of time. And not to totally detour from your question, but one thing Erik said about the professional spring training, they get 6 or 7 weeks of ramp up time, and we get 4 to 5, but we have 4 to 5 with an hour limit. So the first 2 weeks are 2 hours of baseball specific skill instruction. And then you have 3 weeks of practice and scrimmages, where the professional level, they get to spend as much time as they want to out there. So And you throw the academic workload into our model, which the professional level doesn't have. So all that said, student athlete welfare, but that also coincides with the academics.
Why are you an ambassador for this, Coach Godwin? Why is this, aside from EB being a good friend of yours, why are you going to be one of the guys behind this plan and pushing it?
Well, as Erik said, the moving the season back has been proposed before, and I can't remember what year, Erik, when teams in California used to, and I think it was when I was at LSU, like 07, 08, teams in California, Arizona, they could start in January. You could actually start playing. You still had a certain number of games you could play, but there was no official start date. Well, then we got the official start date, and then you had a few years later coaches that wanted to back it up. I've never seen, me personally, and maybe I haven't dove into stuff and I didn't have data in front of me like Erik has presented, but when I was presented this information years ago, it was always about, hey, just the weather, and it was always the northern schools versus south. I don't see this proposal as like that. I see that there is a financial gain for all, I shouldn't say always, for the majority of institutions that play baseball. There's definitely a student welfare component that's going to help the health of student athletes. And then academics is going to help that as well. Less missed class time, more opportunity to focus on their academics, maybe less guys that need more than 4 years to graduate. And then mental health is such a hot topic right now. Do you not think mental health, with all that stuff crammed in such a short time span, is a part of this? If we could take some stress off some student athletes, that maybe we have less mental health issues as well.
Well, you're big on that. You are big on the mental training, the mental preparation, and just not even necessarily from a baseball standpoint, from developing a young men's standpoint. I know you have talked about that with me before. What's the feedback you've gotten? Like, do you feel like kids are more stressed nowadays than earlier in your career because of the demands of college athletics?
Wow, I could go down a real long wormhole here, but number one, they are more stressed. I don't know if it's the academics, it's the world we live in, it's social media. And I'm a big proponent of social media if it's used in the right manner. Back when I became more active, 2008, 2009, on Twitter, I was putting out motivational things in. I think it's more imperative now because kids see the best snapshot of every person that they follow. And as I tell them, I go, how many of those people are actually your friends? And they look at me with this weird look. Well, every one of them's not Erik Bakich to me. Where I'm broken down in a car on I-95 and Erik's in Michigan, I can call Erik and say, hey, look, I know you're probably, but I need help. And can you get here? He's going to drop everything he's doing to come down there and to help me. And kids have this false sense of reality. I get in the same mode where you're looking, Erik's on vacation and Bryant Ward's on vacation, and you're looking at their families, in the Bahamas, and you're like, oh my God, I just worked a 15-hour day. My life sucks. Well, kids are doing that all the time because they're spending so much time. So that is where I think the mental health has really, rose, because kids have more depressing thoughts, I guess, because they look at what other people are doing and, hey, I just, practiced at East Carolina for 2.5 hours. Coach Godwin yelled at me. Then I had to go lift weights, and I can't believe I got to study for a test tomorrow. Well, that's real life. I mean, that's what real life is. You're going to go through hard moments. And I spend, and this is me personally, probably 90% of my time coaching kids' heads, mental training.
Right.
Yes.
I knew that.
We'll teach you the physical part of it with the swing and stuff like that. But if you don't get them right up here and in here, then they ain't going to do what you want them to do anyway, from a hitting aspect or a pitching aspect or taking ground balls.
Coach EB, I want to transition in just a moment to what kind of pushback is there? What kind of effect might this have on, the lower levels? But before I do that, we talked about the benefits from a financial standpoint, an academic standpoint, the welfare of players. Is there anything I'm missing here that we should mention about some of these major benefits to this plan?
No, it's very simple. I mean, it's those three areas. I would be careful when you start going down the mental health road, because so many people have differing opinions on that. And I have similar opinions as CG does, and kids who use social media as a status symbol and how that affects their confidence. But I'm not going to put that in this proposal because, again, that would be my opinion. But this proposal does reduce the physical and mental stress on student athletes. Now, whether that has a direct effect on, whether that lowers anxiety levels or decreases depressive thoughts, I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even going to go there, but it does reduce mental and physical stress by pushing the season back, and the impact that has on the fall and the impact that has on their academics, and allowing them to be more successful and prevent less injuries. So very important point of clarification there.
Right. But I think it's important that, maybe there needs to be a section, not from you, from other coaches that say, hey, look, here's my opinion of what else is good about this. Because I get your standpoint, like we're only going to put the facts in there. We want to eliminate opinions. But a lot of those opinions are probably ones that are common amongst baseball coaches. And maybe there needs to be another section of other people who chime in on what else is good about this, because I think that's really important there. I'm sorry, I cut you off there, though. Was there something else you wanted to add?
No, I think if you want to do that, then you have, in terms of including it in a proposal, then you have some medical expert who's, has a doctorate in the field. And if you want to talk with a counselor, a clinical psychologist, or somebody who can weigh in on that, that would be great, which is why we got Dr. James Andrews, the foremost authority, to weigh in on the student welfare part of ramp time. So it wasn't the coach's opinions, because once you start giving coaches opinions, then everybody has an opinion, and it chips away at the credibility of the proposal. But I think it's great discussion points for stuff like this. When you're talking about it, it sparks a lot of discussion points. Whether people are for it or against it, those are some of their arguments that they can construe themselves.
So, okay, the people that are against it, or not the people, but there's obviously pushback on every idea. What's the biggest thing so far that people are like, no, this is not a good idea because blank?
Number one, because it's different. It's change. And the baseball world forever and ever has just been resistant to change. So it is different. It is better. That's my opinion, but that's also what the data says. And then the second biggest thing is, again, it's not a one size fits all. It's a one size fits most. And the ones that it doesn't fit for are the ones that are warm weather, small school, no attendance programs. They draw a couple hundred fans at best in their games, whether they play their games in February or May. And they're not they don't travel much, so they can't offset the costs at the end of the year with decreasing travel. They don't see any attendance increasing. They're not paying out large financial guarantees. So the addition of the 4 weeks at the end of the academic year, they're looking at that as a real cost. And that's an additional cost to their operating budget. And I just want coaches to make sure they know, running their numbers, they're going to be pleasantly surprised when they just add up the dormitory costs of the students that stay in dorms, not the students that stay off campus, because they're signing 12-month leases that are a no budget impact. It's just the dorms, and it's just per diem. And you look at those two costs, and this proposal allows everybody theoretically to play more home games. Home games have a cost of operating as well. You got to pay for your umpires. You got to pay for pre and post game meals if you offer those, and you got to pay for baseballs. So you factor in all those costs. And in talking to a lot of coaches from all over the country, you're talking about costs in the low tens of thousands. The majority of coaches I have spoke with, their costs are $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, which that could be a big number to a small school's operating budget. And I understand that. I've been at places that have had a $12,000 recruiting budget. So I understand a $50,000 price tag on something maybe big, but it's not insurmountable. And the opposition comes from coaches wondering if they're willing to find that money in their operating budget somehow, or are they willing or are they allowed to fundraise for it? And that's why for some schools, the math just isn't going to work. It's just not going to work. They're not going to be net neutral or net positive. For the majority of schools, they will.
How does this, Coach Godwin, affect the high school level and the travel level, right? Because that group is going to be concerned, well, if you're playing in the summer, then you're not going to be able to see us and recruit us. What is the answer to that part of it?
Well, you can still recruit during the high school season. I mean, we fight that in March. I mean, March 1st is the day that we can go out. So, every coaching staff across the country is battling, when is it okay for Coach Palumbo to miss practice and go watch, Erik Bakich play at, Rose High School. So we all battle that already. Yes, it's going to extend into the summer months some, but it will still allow for time for us to go recruiting. I mean, look, it might affect the way the recruiting calendar has or is right now, but it should start with where we feel like it's best for our sport and then expand and then help everybody else out. It's going to affect summer baseball. I mean, I've seen people, on social media talking about how is it going to affect summer baseball. Well, it's going to affect it. It's not going to kill it, in my opinion. Once again, you'd have to pull data, which I have not done that, but you would have to do that. And, for us, we don't start school normally until August 24th. So you still, everybody's not going to be playing in July in this model. So you still would have the month of July for kids to go out and play summer baseball and for coaches to go out and recruit and all those things.
Coach EB, does this have an impact on the high school level, the travel level, your proposed plan?
Well, it shouldn't stop them from going out and playing. Like Cliff just said, 235 schools are going to be done in June. And in 2022, if this were adopted, on the night of July 4th, there's only 16 teams remaining that are advancing through to a super regional. So the majority of college baseball is done and has all of July and all of August to recruit. I think as coaches, we would always take that trade-off of having kids watch us on TV go play in a super regional in the College World Series versus go, sit out in the background of your Zoom background right there at Lake Point. Not that, that's not fun. And because I love recruiting and CG loves recruiting and a lot of coaches love recruiting. It's one of the highlights of what we get to do in picking our team, but it doesn't diminish recruiting at all. It just maybe shrinks the window of which you can do it in the summer if you're making a postseason run. And if you're making a postseason run, you're getting the attention of a lot of recruits anyway. So again, opinion there, but the one thing this model also does, we all know there's a lot of events that are jammed into late September and October from a recruiting standpoint. And with the fall opening up a little bit for our student athletes, now you can have your coaches can go out and recruit those events without feeling like they're missing the player development time of their team. And that's the big juggle for us is every time we go out in the fall, that's a rep that our players don't get from us as coaches. We are abandoning our players and their player development and coaching reps on campus to go out and recruit. And now we don't have to make that decision.
What about summer camps? Isn't there going to be, like, if you move the schedule back a month, like that first month of summer, I mean, aren't a lot of colleges using that as a time to make money for their volunteer assistants and for their programs through camps? So is there going to be a lost income stream there?
Look, again, you got to think big picture here. So we as coaches, we run all these camps to pay for our volunteer coach to get him an income. We like these camps for the recruiting opportunities, but most importantly, to pay our coaches, especially that volunteer. We try to pass a third paid assistant coach and it gets shot down because athletic directors and departments don't want to spend money on a sport that loses so much money. If we ever are going to get that volunteer into a full-time paid role where he has benefits and he has a real salary, this is the next step. So we spin our wheels sometimes trying to run that additional camp, and we do it out of necessity. But if we're talking about what's best long-term, future of college baseball, and we want our volunteers to have medical benefits and a full-time salary, this is the way to do it. This is the way athletic directors will ever approve that, and more scholarships down the road too. If we're going to grow the game, this is the next step.
Coach Godwin, the impact on the draft, isn't there going to be some sort of, I don't know, overflow of the
Yeah,
calendar?
I mean, look, Erik knows more about this than I do, but, there would have to be discussions. And, Major League Baseball, look, as everybody's been affected by COVID-19, Major League Baseball has already decreased the number of minor league baseball teams. So there's going to be less minor league baseball teams. There's going to be obviously a very small draft, 5 rounds coming up June 10th. And then I think next year is going to be 20 or less. So I think Major League Baseball, this is a good time where I think they would work with us to maybe have an opportunity to move the draft to a date that would reflect better if the season was pushed back in our sport.
Coach EB, feel free to add on to that, but I did want to ask you about in your frequently asked questions section, which is what I'm looking at right now and trying to pull some of that stuff out for the listeners. There's also an MLB scholarship plan, and you talk a little bit about diversity and low-income families. Can you kind of explain or expand on that for us?
Sure. Well, just to add on to what Cliff just said, the partnership between college baseball and Major League Baseball or professional baseball can continue to grow and thrive under this model. That it's okay. Let me rephrase that. Professional baseball, as Cliff just said, is reducing the number of rounds in a draft. And the impact that has on college baseball is we're going to have more seniors retained, and we're going to have a better caliber of player coming into college baseball. So college baseball can grow in that regard. The other thing Major League Baseball is doing is they're shrinking their short season teams. They're reducing, and in some cases, I don't want to speak for Major League Baseball, but every indication that we have is that they are reducing the number of minor league teams. Currently, they're at 160 minor league teams across the country, and they're looking at eliminating all the short season leagues and some rookie ball teams. That has implications for college baseball as well, specifically in terms of the draft. Major League Baseball has always held their draft in early June because that's when the college season and high school season have ended. And those short season leagues were a great landing spot for those college players. Now those leagues are gone. There's really all the indications that we have for Major League Baseball is they would like a later draft, especially now that short season baseball is potentially going away. So this works a little bit in concert with our desire to push the season back as college coaches and Major League Baseball's desire to have a later draft, whether that be in July or whenever it is. So those two go hand in hand. The other implication or the positive benefit, and again, I don't want to speak for Major League Baseball. These conversations have been had at the preliminary level. So it's not like there's something already set here, but there has been dialogue, and there has been dialogue for a long time about MLB subsidizing college baseball scholarships. And it's always been a non-starter just because we just couldn't ever gain traction on it. Well, MLB has a scholarship plan where they are paying for juniors to finish their educations, right? Whatever their budget is for that. Right now, everybody's in a money saving, decrease expenses mode. So now is not the right time to have these conversations at length, but in the future, there can be conversations that can gain traction to reallocate that MLB scholarship plan instead of now that they may not need as much for all the juniors that are that have signed professionally to finish their degree, since there'll be less of them with a shortened draft. We can hopefully utilize that money on the front end. And on the front end, because our sport as a whole is so poor in representing low income and minority families, and this is a whole nother topic of conversation. This is 100% my opinion. And I think that early sports specialization is a huge friggin' problem in our sport. And we are driving kids out of our game because it's so expensive. And then when you have to play travel baseball at 8U, 9U, 10U, and those kids can't play other sports, and the burnout, and you're pricing out a lot of low-income kids and a lot of minority players. And the reason that's important is because some of those kids would be the best players in our sport. We are losing some of the best athletes that would stick with baseball if they knew it wasn't so expensive, and if they had to play year round as a 10-year-old. And if they knew that, hey, you know, I would like to play in college, but I can't afford a 30% scholarship. You know, we got a lot of issues there. So that's my opinion. I'll stand by that all day, and I'll go on and on. I've spoken at length about that at other places.
Yeah,
those are ripple effects of this proposal far down the road. Those are just topics for people to digest as they want to. But the main thing is the main thing. It's the three-prong rationale for this proposal and moving the season back. But all of those things are future for future implications in a positive way for people who may be wondering, which is why they're in the FAQ section.
Look, that's the same reason that I'm doing this right here. I know you've been caught up with building this plan, but all throughout the COVID shutdown here, I've been doing these types of interviews with college coaches. And I plan to continue to do them through Flat Ground because we're getting information to players that otherwise they've always had to pay for, right? Whether it's through some sort of service or I got to be on this travel team that goes here, here, and here, or I got to sign up for this camp or this. And you're right. I mean, kids are completely priced out of opportunities, and families are completely priced out of opportunities. And so, yeah, I mean, that's what this is all about. And if anybody were to ever, try to argue with me about this or the legality of, holding podcasts, like, what are we doing here? All we're doing is giving information directly from you guys to the families so that they don't have to pay for that information to get, hopefully, that scholarship. Coach Godwin, what does college baseball, let's say this plan passes and we start it, how does college baseball look different 5-10 years from now because of this plan?
Well, it's going to be more fan-friendly. It's going to be a better televised sport for sure. I think it's going to mirror the model of Major League Baseball. Our season would start almost simultaneously. I almost messed that word up, I guess, but it would start.
I think you got it.
Yeah, exact same time as Major League Baseball, and it would mirror, basketball and football, how they mirror the professional leagues. So I think it would look, our sports continue to rise over the past few years, but I hope people just are open-minded, because what Erik said earlier is the biggest thing is just change. And you have, myself included, when, Erik first talked to me about it, your first reaction is, hold on, man, like, I feel like we're in a pretty good spot. But then you start diving into it in a time when we have access to more time, and Erik's done a ton of research, and you see the numbers Erik has presented, and you go, why wouldn't we do this? And I know it benefits East Carolina, so there'll be people that say, well, it benefits Michigan, but Erik's talked to way more teams than just northern teams or just southern teams. He's reached out, and a lot of the people that he's had on these committees have voiced their opinions to help him with this model. And look, it's not the final thing. I mean, there will be continued conversations to, continue to revise it and to make it better. But the idea of what Erik has put together with other coaches, I'll go stand on the island with Erik Bakich and try to make our sport better.
Coach Bakich, what is the reason for doing this for you? Is it about, what's the reason for me putting in a bunch of free work right now through podcasts and information? Yeah, it's to carve out my place in the game, to put a stamp on the game in a positive way. For you, what's this about? Is that the same thing, or why are you spending so much time and going to be the guy at the front of this?
Well, I understand I might be at the front of this because I put the 35 pages together, but there's a lot of coaches, it's not just me and Cliff on an island. There's a lot of coaches that are for this, and if this is going to pass, it's not going to be Michigan or East Carolina proposing this. Is not going to be the Big Ten or one conference proposing it. This is going to pass because college baseball coaches came together on an initiative for the betterment of our sport. Because everybody, whether it's yourself and what you're passionate about, or us and what we're passionate about, which is the game of baseball and college baseball and the growth and improvement of it, then we have to make adjustments when life throws us these curveballs. And life has thrown us a massive curveball for everybody in all walks of life. And this is just a necessary adjustment that we need to make, and college coaches need to come together and maybe put some of our personal opinions aside and say, what's the best thing for our sport and what's the best thing for the future for these young kids that are going to be playing our sport?
Before we go, with the dead summer ahead of us, which is probably not the best term to use, but the dead period summer ahead of us, what's the advice, Coach Godwin, to the kids who are saying, oh no, I'm not going to get a chance to be recruited? Or, hey, I got an offer from this school, I'm just going to take it right now so that I have something. There's a lot of panic out there. Trying to reduce that panic. If they hear it from you, it's way better than hearing it from me or their travel coach or their high school coach or their mom or dad. So what do you, Coach Godwin, head coach of East Carolina University, suggest families do going into this dead summer?
Number one, don't panic. You know, we've had enough of that in our country as a united country. I hope it can stay united during this time, but stay in the present moment, work as hard as you can at your craft, go out and play as hard as you can, communicate with the coaches of the schools that you want to be recruited by, try to send them videos. But my biggest thing is, and I've talked to a couple of travel coaches that have the same questions that you have, and back when you just went out and played. You didn't worry about who was watching you. You just went out and played because you loved the game, and you wanted to compete. And I just would challenge the kids and the parents to get caught up in the moment of playing the game of baseball like you did when you were 8, 9, 10 years old, and you weren't worried about a college coach recruiting you. Because if you go out there and do what you're supposed to do, we will find you, and you will be able to go to a school that will fit your needs, and it will be a great summer.
Coach Bakich, your final thoughts for us all today.
Well, just to piggyback on what Cliff just said, you know, time is time. I mean, even though it seems like time has slowed down here, there's still 24 hours in a day. And for all the youngsters out there that don't have a tournament to play in, how they utilize their time is going to impact their opportunities down the road. And if they're utilizing this time and just spending it, wasting it, you know, in video games and mindless surfing on the internet and not really using it as a chance to improve, then, you know, those are the ones that are going to be really disappointed when things do back up. Because the one thing we know about our country is we will get back up and get moving again. Baseball will be back. Athletics will be back. And the kids that have invested their time during this time and have continued to train and continued to, even if they don't have the same facility resources as they've always had, but just found a way to get creative. And if that means going outside doing push-ups and sit-ups and jumps and sprints and back pedals and all kinds of stuff that they can do to just stay sharp, those are the guys that are going to be in a better position when they do need to, when the lights do come back on and it is time to get back out there. But you're right. You never know who's watching. You know, if you're chasing personal growth and personal development and not the target of who's watching me, then those are the kids that are going to be just fine, because those are the kids that are going to be driven intrinsically anyways.
Well, Coach Bakich, Coach Godwin, I appreciate you guys coming on here and doing this today, explaining exactly what this proposal means for baseball, college baseball, travel baseball, high school baseball. I mean, it's great stuff. And the more people that hear it, the more chance we have of making a good decision either way and a positive change for baseball. So thank you guys very much for doing this.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having us, buddy.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it.